Good afternoon, conference. It's the afternoon. Good afternoon, conference. Now, as Zia has previously reminded us, LinkedIn founder Reid Hoffman once said that building a startup is like jumping off a cliff and assembling the airplane on the way down. Now, for those of you here that have been with us on the journey since 2021, you'll agree Reform UK has often felt exactly like that. And so it has given me enormous satisfaction to hear over the last 2 days so much about how our political startup is now taking shape as a fully fledged party. A party with a constitution, a party with local branches, and after this year's elections, a party with elected politicians. So I would like to do 3 things today. Firstly, I'd like to reflect on this journey that we've been on over the last 3 years, particularly from a London perspective. Secondly, I want to tell you about London from the vantage point of being Reform UK's first elected London Assembly member. And thirdly, I want to look to the future and why, being amongst you all here today, I am filled with optimism. When we took part in the London elections back in May 2021, we had nobody standing to be mayor. All we had was a small team of candidates for the Assembly, a handful of leaflets, and just enough budget to pay our deposit. But that we were able to contest that election at all is entirely down to the leadership and support of one man without whom we would not be where we are today. That man is, of course, Richard Tice. Or to use his full title, the Honourable Member for Boston and Skegness, Richard Tice, MP. Thank you, Richard. Now, campaigning in that election in 21 felt at times like shouting into a wind tunnel. The country was still in lockdown, preventing us from knocking on doors. Campaign meetings, to the extent that they happened at all, were held on Zoom. And on the rare occasions that we almost accidentally bumped into the public in the streets or outside their houses, our first job was simply explaining who Reform was. Now, according to the famous quote attributed to Mahatma Gandhi, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. We are in no doubt that after the dirty tricks of this summer, we've definitely reached the point at which they fight us. But back in 2021, let me tell you, we were firmly in the being ignored stage, excluded from hustings, getting zero coverage in the mainstream media. Most opinion pollsters didn't even prompt for us. And to be honest, our election results weren't great. Reform UK's share of the London-wide list vote was precisely 1%. So some candidates that stood in 2021 stepped back from the fray, feeling perhaps that their efforts were to no end, that campaigning for such a small party was futile. But for those of us that continued, progress was steady, rewarding the persistence and resilience of a small but growing band of committed activists. Now, admittedly, there have been points along the way where our hard work was ably assisted by the Conservatives. The defenestration of Liz Truss in October 2022 was a clear inflection point, leading to a surge of new members and a doubling of our rating in the polls. As we began 2024, we contested the by-election in Wellingborough, where I ran Ben Habib's campaign. And the recognition we got there was like nothing we'd seen in any by-election before. We were no longer Reform who, but a genuine contender. So in the end, we secured 13% of the vote. What a change from my own by-election in Chesham and Amersham less than 3 years before, where with just 1.1%, we barely troubled the scorers. But then to the London mayoral and Assembly elections of May this year, followed almost immediately by the July general election, where in the space of just a few short weeks, we got 1 London Assembly member, 5 Westminster MPs, and 4 million votes. So how did we achieve what we did in May? It was mostly through the simple, hard graft of old-fashioned campaigning, leafleting across the city, street stalls outside stations and shopping centres, We had the Reform taxi, and of course we also had our magnificent Reform bus. But we also had our superstar mayoral candidate, the tireless Howard Cox, who, thanks to his amazing Fair Fuel UK campaign, brought with him a large following, an excellent media profile, and a massive live issue on which to hang our campaign. We were the only mainstream party pledging to scrap all of Sadiq Khan's ULEZ tax on working drivers. And if we win the mayoral election in 2028, we will scrap all of ULEZ. So following from our 1% result in 2021, we achieved 5.9% in the list-wide vote. And as a result, I now sit as one of 25 representatives on the London Assembly, tasked with holding Mayor Sadiq Khan to account in his role, spending his £20 billion budget in a way that should deliver for Londoners. Well, here's a spoiler alert. He is not delivering. In one key area after another, he has failed our city. Sadiq Khan is responsible for policing. The recent Peel inspection report shows the Metropolitan Police scoring inadequate or requires improvement in all areas bar one. London continues to be blighted by knife crime, up 38% since Sadiq Khan took office. The Metropolitan Police has abandoned outer London boroughs, which have next to no blue light response and often no police station front desk. Domestic burglary and car crime have effectively become decriminalised in the outer reaches of our city. Housing delivery has stalled, while prices for both purchase and rent become ever more unaffordable. And in response, central government has cut London's housing target as a humiliating admission of Khan's failure. And of course, the mayor has continued to wage his war on the motorist, building on his extension of the ULEZ zone by now imposing a toll on the Blackwall Tunnel, something that, alongside a group of our Reform parliamentary candidates, I've been leading the campaign against. Now, the date of last year's conference in London will live in our memories forever, for all the wrong reasons. It was October the 7th, and even as I walked back down Edgware Road to the tube station, the Palestinian flags were already out in celebration at the worst massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust. Straight away, this set the tone for what we've seen on London streets week after week ever since. These are not peaceful protests, they are hate marches. And the unchallenged genocidal chanting and placards have made central London on protest days a no-go zone for our Jewish community. We all know what calls for jihad and intifada mean. We all know what from the river to the sea means. And for all the talk of extremism and hate over the summer, there's only one racial or religious group in our country that faces repeated calls for its extermination, and yet successive Home Secretaries won't get a grip. The Met Police won't get a grip, and the Mayor of London won't get a grip. And my message to London's Jewish community is clear and simple. I am on your side. I will uphold your right to live and worship unimpeded in our city, and I will always support Israel's right to defend itself. Now, unfortunately, the left has a clear majority on the Assembly. My time for questioning is limited to just a handful of minutes at each session. And yet, as with our presence in the House of Commons, we now have that beachhead. In London City Hall, I'm focused on pushing back hard on what, for all the performative falling out, is a cosy consensus among the other parties. At committee meetings, at plenary sessions, at Mayor's Question Time, I now have the opportunity to put questions not just to the Mayor, but to the other key London figures, such as the Commissioners of the Police and Transport for London, and I will continue to be raising your voice in putting those questions to them. It's easy to despair at the re-election of Sadiq Khan and to think of Labour's dominance of London as somehow permanent and unassailable, and not natural Reform UK territory. This would be a mistake. There is nothing inevitable, nothing permanent about Labour's hold over London. Remember, in 2016, more people in London voted to leave the European Union than voted for Khan as mayor. And what is Natural Reform UK territory? Let me tell you what I think is Natural Reform UK territory. Great Britain, all of it, including our capital city. Of course, we need to target our priority areas and try and replicate the Lib Dems' expertise in leveraging their vote share for maximum seats. But the story of Reform UK in London, as across the country, is one of increasing momentum and a great deal of promise. Under Nigel's inspirational leadership and the instant boost his return brought to our polling, media attention, excitement from voters and every aspect of the campaign, we had a fantastic general election. We proved the pundits wrong, and on all three key measures, raw votes, percentage vote share and seats won, we smashed UKIP's record from 2015. And we did that without yet having a sizable local government base, but believe me, that is coming, and without having won a European election the year before. So that election, that general election, has taught us a great deal about our voters, and just as importantly, about our next tranche of target voters. We came in the top 3 in over 2/3 of constituencies nationwide. The challenge now, which we're starting today, is to build the ground organisation to match the air war, so we turn the third places into seconds and the seconds into firsts. In London too, we have our targets. This time we stood a candidate in each of the 75 constituencies. We will win council seats in 2026. We'll have another crack at the mayor and assembly in 2028. And at the next general election, our greatly enlarged parliamentary party will include a cohort from London. So just this week, branches have been launched in areas of London such as Merton and Wandsworth, Hillingdon and Harrow, Newham and Tower Hamlets, none of which you might think of Natural Reform territory. In Keir Starmer's own backyard, over 60 people attended the launch of our Camden and Haringey branch. I think some of them might be here. And in all of these branch meetings, we've attracted new members, many of whom are champing at the bit to campaign. So council by-elections are an important stepping stone for us, and I'm delighted to confirm we are already standing in 3 upcoming contests in Ealing, 1 in Bexley and 1 in Greenwich. And in all 5 of those seats, we'll be looking to replicate the success the party is seeing in other parts of the country. So this conference, this is why I am so optimistic about our party's future over the next few years. Campaigning for an insurgent party requires, as I've said, resilience and persistence. 2 traits I see in abundance among all of you here today. These qualities were essential in the early years of our journey, and we will need them more than ever if we're to meet Zia's challenge to form the next government. Along the way, you may hear a number of reasons why this is simply not possible, why it makes little sense to campaign or stand for reform. But let me remind you what people were saying from 2021 onwards. They used to say, Reform UK won't succeed until all the small parties on the right get together. Remember that? Nobody's saying that now. Then they said, Reform UK might do well in the polls, but they won't win any seats. Nobody's saying that now either. Then they said, a vote for reform is a wasted vote. Well, we've just had 4 million reasons for no longer saying that. And then most recently, I've heard, Reform UK isn't a proper political party. After today, they won't be saying that either. Because now, what we are seeing increasingly is negativity being flipped into positive support, inertia flipped into action, apathy flipped into anger, because everybody has their tipping point. Everybody reaches a stage beyond which they can no longer sit quietly and watch the news on TV or scroll through their social media feed without saying, enough is enough. I hit my own tipping point during lockdown, when our government embarked on the most far-reaching and unjustified assault on individual liberty of modern times. For some, it was what happened to Liz Truss. For others, it was Labour government's authoritarian response to the recent disorder. But at some point in the past, you all hit your tipping point. That is why you're here. And look around you today. You are all in very, very good company. Before July, the Conservatives in government were arguably Reform UK's most effective recruiting sergeant. But now Labour, under Keir Starmer, is doing, if such a thing is possible, an even better job for us. How different from the presentation-obsessed era of Tony Blair? Could you possibly imagine Peter Mandelson, with his obsessive control of the optics and the news agenda, allowing the removal of winter fuel payment and the early release of violent prisoners on the same day? Before July, we were seen as the political home for Conservatives betrayed by the leftward lurch of the Tories. But now it is no longer just about left and right, as so many Labour voters are feeling buyer's remorse. They see in Starmer's party a contempt for ordinary Britons, a self-destructive messianic pursuit of net zero, and a lack of concern about what are, to all intents and purposes, open borders. Increasingly, voters see in Reform UK a party of freedom, of enterprise, but above all of decency, a party that will take the actions needed to secure our borders, to stop our pensioners dying from cold, to turbocharge economic growth, and to stand up for the history, values, and culture of our great country. So week by week, more and more people are hitting their tipping point. Week by week, we are attracting not just new members, but new activists and new candidates, and with that, new energy. It's already been a rollercoaster year for Reform UK, but we are only just getting started. Nigel and Zia have a plan to challenge for power, and you are all part of that plan. Whether you're in London, in Leeds, or Llandudno, be sure of this. If we work together in unison, we can do this for your families, we can do this for our communities, and we can do this for our country. Thank you very much.